If you're going to get in the way of two people voluntarily exchanging, you better have a really good reason. Hey there, friends, fans, and foes of Dad Saves America. John Popola here, and I thought I would take this Friday to talk about trade, because it's in the news and we are off to the races on a hot and cold trade war with President Trump and our nearest neighbors.
Mr. President, is there anything China, Canada, and Mexico can do tonight to forestall your implementation of tariffs tomorrow?
No, nothing. Not right now, no.
Not a negotiating tool?
No, it's not. No, it's a pure economic. We have big deficits with, as you know, with all three of them. And in one case, they're sending massive amounts of fentanyl, killing hundreds of thousands of people a year with the fentanyl. And in the other two cases, they're making it possible for this poison to get in, number one. And number two, we have big deficits, and it's something we're doing.
Now, as of this recording, President Trump has already sort of paused some of these tariffs, and I expect this to keep changing on a daily basis. He is an energetic president, and the ground is changing fast. But I think President Trump's fundamental posture here says a lot, and it hasn't changed that much. But let's keep watching.
It's a lot of money coming to the United States. As you know, we have about a $200 billion deficit with Canada, getting close to $200 billion. They've treated us very unfairly. With Mexico, it's the same thing. We have a $250 billion deficit, and we have a lot of people coming into the border, and now we've largely stopped that, but we've stopped that ourselves. For years and years, we've suffered with millions of criminals coming into our country. Criminals, people from jails from all over the world. They come through Mexico, and they come through Canada, too. A lot of them come through Canada, and a lot of fentanyl comes through.
This is an area where President Trump, if nothing else, has been really consistent, going all the way back.
I think a lot of people are tired of watching other countries ripping off the United States. This is a great country. They laugh at us. Behind our backs, they laugh at us because of our own stupidity.
One of the reasons we say we're doing it is because we've been doing it, and that all previous presidents have endorsed doing it.
And I think by doing it here, we're saying free trade.
I guess the kind of thinking of an entrepreneur is because somebody else said it was right doesn't make it right, right?
Larry, the country is losing $200 billion a year. $200 billion. This country cannot continue to lose $200 billion. Japan is one of the wealthiest machines ever created. The United States is, if it were a corporation, it would be bankrupt. It's losing $200 billion a year. For years now it's been losing that. What right do we have to go out and defend? Why aren't these countries, these wealthy money machines, paying us for the defense of their freedom and their nations? Why aren't they paying us?
We are kind of the world's keeper, are we not?
I don't believe we should be. I think Japan should certainly make a contribution. Japan is one of the reasons they're so successful is they don't have to worry about defense, because why should they worry about defense when the United States will do it for nothing? I mean, it's crazy.
You can see that the president hasn't changed his tune all that much. What is he talking about, this $200 billion? He's talking about the trade deficit. I think when you talk about sending money to defend other countries, that gets into something else. And as President Trump often does, he conflates a lot of different aspects of an issue and weaves them together in ways that can sometimes be a little hard to follow. He's fundamentally talking about our trade deficits with different countries. Well, what is a trade deficit? A trade deficit is simply that we as a country, the people of the country, buy more goods from that country than that country sells to us. One way to think about this is I run a trade deficit with my grocery store. In fact, with all the stores I go and shop at, I give them my money and they give me the goods. I have never sold any videos to my grocery store. Well, I guess technically that's not entirely true. I did make a feature documentary together with Whole Foods Market. So I guess in one sense I did actually sell my video services to my grocery store. But in general, we all run trade deficits with the stores that we shop at. And that is what we're actually talking about. We send our money to companies in China and Mexico and Canada. And then rather than those people in those countries buying an equal amount of US goods, they will sometimes instead buy from other countries and trade ends up always being in balance in that those dollars actually come back to the US. It's called the capital account surplus. Those dollars don't go out and just disappear. They come back in the form of investment and lending and other things. That's a short version of the trade deficit story. We could spend an entire video just talking about that. But that is the deficit that Donald Trump is talking about when he says 200 billion. He's not talking about sending $200 billion in taxpayer money out the door. He's talking about the trade deficit. It's not the same thing. Now, that being said, when we talk about global trade and we talk about the politics of our international order, I think Donald Trump has actually had pretty good points about the fact that the US has been a kind of global police state. We've been Team America, world police for a long time. And I think this has been something that's actually been really refreshing from the president and his incoming hopeful cabinet, that they want to reevaluate that. That has not, on balance, been great for us. And you see that here.
You took out a full-page ad in major U.S. newspapers last year criticizing U.S. foreign policy. What would you do differently, Donald?
I'd make our allies pay their fair share. We're a debtor nation. Something's going to happen over the next number of years with this country, because you can't keep going on losing $200 billion, and yet we let Japan come in and dump everything right into our markets and everything. It's not free trade. If you ever go to Japan right now and try to sell something, forget about it, Oprah. Just forget about it. It's almost impossible. They don't have laws against it. They just make it impossible. They come over here, they sell their cars, their VCRs, they knock the hell out of our companies. And hey, I have tremendous respect for the Japanese people. I mean, you can respect somebody that's beating the hell out of you, but they are beating the hell out of this country. I really am tired of seeing what's happening with this country, how we're really making other people live like kings, and we're not.
The Japanese did beat us up, and for good reason, because American cars sucked. And Toyotas and Hondas were better. They're also better than the German cars, which drive great for about 10 minutes and then they break and cost a fortune. Competition from the likes of Japanese car manufacturers like Toyota and Honda helped US manufacturers improve. Ford is a better car manufacturer today because of the competition from the likes of Toyota. So we weren't getting screwed by Toyota selling us great cars. I think that this is where Donald Trump conflates the nation in the international trading system with individual companies. He even said it, if the US was a company, we'd be getting screwed. We would not be doing good deals. But the US is not a company, it's a country. And the American people are not all employees of Uncle Sam. We are sovereign individuals that I believe should, by and large, be allowed to buy from pretty much whoever we want. If you're going to get in the way of two people voluntarily exchanging, like me and my Toyota dealer, you better have a really good reason. Now, I'm going to dig deeper into that, but I want to point out something that's an interesting distinction in rhetoric from another former president, probably the closest president in our lifetimes to Donald Trump in many ways, and that's actually Ronald Reagan. Here's a good old Ronnie talking about free trade, contra Donald Trump.
We too often talk about trade while using the vocabulary of war. In war, for one side to win, the other must lose. But commerce is not warfare. Trade is an economic alliance that benefits both countries. There are no losers, only winners, and trade helps strengthen the free world. Yet today, protectionism is being used by some American politicians as a cheap form of nationalism. Our peaceful trading partners are not our enemies. They are our allies. We should beware of the demagogues who are ready to declare a trade war against our friends, weakening our economy, our national security, and the entire free world, all while cynically waving the American flag.
Strong words. This clip was making the rounds on X. And for understandable reasons, it sounds like Ronald Reagan excoriating a then present and now current Donald Trump as a demagogue waving the American flag. There's a couple problems with this. One is that was Reagan's rhetoric, and he was on balance a free trader, but he wasn't a perfect free trader. So a friend of mine, Sheldon Richman, wrote an article back in the late 80s sort of reviewing Ronald Reagan's trade record and found a couple things that are, you could say, flag-waving, nationalistic demagoguery, in his words. For example, The administration's first major protectionist move was pressuring Japan into accepting so-called voluntary restraints on exports of autos. The 80s was a time when, as you heard from Donald Trump at that point, the great worry was that Japan was going to overtake the US and buy up all our land and we were going to lose. And so President Reagan actually instituted a 100% tariff on select Japanese electronics. And this should sound familiar. Quote, "The health and vitality of the US semiconductor industry are essential to America's future competitiveness. We cannot allow it to be jeopardized by unfair trading practices," said Ronald Reagan. Sounds like Donald Trump in 2025. So it's easy to talk a big game on free trade, but when you're in American politics and when you have a public and special interests that are clamoring for protection, it's hard to stick to your guns. Senator Rand Paul offered one example of why this kind of protection isn't always so obvious who it's protecting and who it's hurting.
So the best way to look at tariffs is the seen and the unseen. You can see the steel workers you might help, but you don't see the 80 workers who buy steel for every one worker making steel that suffers from higher prices. Without question, tariffs raise prices and aren't good for trade. As leverage and negotiation, of course, the president was the ultimate negotiator. He did get Mexico to send some troops, and he got Canada to step up their patrols. So as a negotiating weapon, absolutely they have value as long as we never enact them when they are a disaster for trade and for the consumer.
We the people, we individual American citizens, have a couple things we're concerned about that when it comes to trade and tariffs are often at odds with each other. One is, we don't want to lose our jobs. We don't want to have our plant or our business closed down because cheaper foreign competition put us out of business. That sucks. In fact, when President Reagan talked about it's a win-win for everybody, I think he's underplaying the pain of that.
There are no losers, only winners, and trade helps strengthen the free world.
There are no losers, only winners. In the aggregate, I think that is unquestionably true over time. But in the short run, there are losers. If your plant gets closed down, you lost. That sucks. When you have massive disruptions, when you have big shifts in our economy, like the opening up to China that happened with the World Trade Organization, you have a lot of disruption and it sucks and it's painful and there are losers. There are people who will not ever recover the income level that they were at in their former profession. So that's one thing. We want our jobs protected. We want a path for our careers to grow. And when you have built skills and expertise and a network of relationships in an industry, well, that's how you make more money over time. That's how, as you get older, you make more money because you get better at your craft. If your entire industry is destroyed, like the textile industry in the United States, for example, you're out of luck. So that sucks. Flip side of that, though, is that we all want lower prices. And one of the other pieces of President Trump's campaign and the top issues for the American people heading into the election last year was inflation and the rising cost of living. Everything is expensive, everything, especially housing. But that is something that has hurt everyone. And when Senator Paul says that for every one person who benefits in the steel plant, there's 8 other businesses with employees losing because their costs have gone up. And then the thousands of customers who have less money in their pocket because the cost of their vehicles and everything else that involves steel also went up. That is true. That is an example of what economists like to say, concentrated benefits. Okay, you got your job protected. And so that's a big deal. That's a big benefit concentrated for you. And dispersed costs. Cars might have gone up by a couple $100. Washing machines, which experienced tariffs under the last Trump administration, might go up by a couple $100. And so if you kept your job making, say, $80,000 a year on the assembly line, well, that's a lot more money than a couple $100 extra on your car or your washing machine. But in the aggregate for the society, very often, your 80 grand cost the rest of us 800 grand. I saw a window into this tension firsthand because my wife and I actually got into the manufacturing business about a decade ago. I was working at Spike TV and I had a long commute home, and Lisa had decided to stay home with our son, and she had an idea for a business. We were cloth diapering our son, Mateo. And she had a really cute idea for a design that she wanted to sell. And let me play a little video because I think it's pretty cute. And again, if you're a dad or a mom, you will appreciate this.
How did you grow so big overnight? How did you get so smart and bright? Yesterday you were asleep in my arms. Today you're growing off the charts. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you.
It was 15 years ago. That's the product. It's a garment. And we confronted the challenges of manufacturing in the United States along every dimension trying to do this. You can imagine that the typical buyer of cloth diapers is a crunchy granola mom who happens to also be kind of a locavore and wants to buy local. So having them made overseas, where most garments are manufactured, was really frowned upon. You wanted to be made in America. The problem was that was really hard. In fact, we never quite got it. We worked on this for years and never made a nickel. It was a net loss. We literally took home zero income as a family. We ended up in 65 different stores. We had other partners. It was neat, but we could never get the cost of production down low enough to ever make any money. And this was the problem of the constraints of these two forces. So, crunchy granola moms that want cloth diapers that are made in the US and don't want to spend the amount of money it would actually take to manufacture them in the US. We were in the aftermath of the Great Recession. We had high unemployment, we had slow economy, and yet we talked to local manufacturers in places like Newark, New Jersey, who said they were offering $25, $30 an hour plus full health benefits on day one and couldn't get a single applicant to do the work. So we folded. We couldn't make a living. The conflicting desires of the American consumer played out for us and to devastating effect. And I think this speaks to a bunch of the challenges we face with trade. Most of domestic manufacturing and textiles got shipped overseas, where the labor was a lot cheaper and where there was also maybe customs of textile creation that made it possible to employ people that had, developed skills. So when an industry goes away, all of the pieces of the puzzle start to unravel. You don't have apprenticeship. You don't have families that stay in the business for a long time. You don't have a kind of structure of entering at the entry level and working your way up. It all just goes away. And you can't just recreate it whole cloth because there's a new product you want to make. I think that's one of the problems and challenges with free trade as it's come to be in the modern age. There are products that we don't want to be cut off from in a time of crisis. And we don't want to have no ability to manufacture here in the US, given that we're a large country. Not every country is big, right? If you go to any number of small countries, they have no hope of making everything for themselves that they need, especially like island nations. These countries are incredibly reliant on trade for just about everything. But we have a big country. We have a lot of natural resources, energy, agriculture, lumber. We do, in some sense, you could say, have everything we need. But even that's not true because we all want costs to go down. And there are things that are made elsewhere for less. That is the trade-off we face. It's very real. It's very difficult. And I think we saw during COVID that it can be a downright national security problem. During COVID, several products, including baby-related ones like baby formula, went into short supply. Some critical medicines were in short supply because we had come to rely on Chinese manufacturing for these things. We all are familiar with the fact that, as President Reagan was worried about back in the 80s, semiconductors are manufactured overwhelmingly abroad, increasingly by one company, TSMC, out of Taiwan, which produces all of the chips for, say, NVIDIA and Apple Computer and many others. China could just blockade Taiwan tomorrow, and virtually all of our electronics would suddenly be, if not impossible to get, wildly more expensive. That's not a non-issue. That's actually a big deal. And one of the problems with being anti-fragile is we need to have a certain amount of redundancy. Free trade creates economic efficiency. It creates a division of labor and specialization. We get to get better at the things we're good at, and other people in other countries focus on and get way better at the things they're good at. And we all do ultimately over time benefit from that increased output. This is Adam Smith's work in The Wealth of Nations, that the division of labor, which is to say, how do we get to focus more narrowly on our specific area of expertise and divide our labor, divide and conquer. That is limited by the extent of the market, how many trading partners we have. The reason why we have lots of choice in our stores is because we have lots of people with lots of different tastes and lots of trading partners that enable all that diversity, all that choice. The reason why we have so many car models is because we have a global market for automobiles. That's division of labor, specialization, and comparative advantage. That's David Ricardo's phrase. That is all true. Basically, every economist agrees that that is correct. Donald Trump's us versus them, zero-sum, art of the deal, impulses on this aren't good economics theoretically. But sometimes efficiency brings fragility. So when we saw firsthand during COVID how supply chains broke and how the lack of any inventory in the system, because we'd gotten so efficient with such a broad global division of labor, the iPhone is the product not of China. China assembles this thing. But the glass from Corning is made, I think, in Germany, and the microprocessors are made in Taiwan and designed in California. And the aluminum or titanium or whatever this metal edge is, that's made somewhere else and mined somewhere else before that. Over 100 countries are involved in making the iPhone. So it isn't just made in China. That's false. We're deeply interconnected. But that also makes us kind of fragile. And when there's a disruption, things break, and they break hard. And Nassim Taleb said, look, if economists had their way, we'd all share one kidney instead of having a spare in our own bodies. Because why do you need two? There's a certain amount of buffer that having self-sufficiency provides. It's a kind of insurance policy. And so having two kidneys is an insurance policy. It costs us, our bodies, a little extra in calories to maintain, but so too can some instances of a certain amount of economic nationalism be beneficial, provide us with leverage, negotiating power, and close down opportunities for adversaries to try to head us off at the pass. There is one last point I want to make. In the battle between cheaper goods and protecting our livelihoods, trade isn't actually the hardest problem we face. We have a different thing that does even more, both for good, bringing down the costs, and for ill, disrupting the structure of our lives. And that is technology. It turns out that manufacturing labor in the United States has actually been falling since the 1950s. And the reason isn't trade, it's automation. We get to do more with less by using machine labor instead of human labor. If you stripped out all the automation in our society, you would be back to the Stone Age. You wouldn't have air conditioning, you wouldn't have automobiles. Automation moves people's cheese. We all need to eat, right? Well, automation is the reason why food is cheap, and it's going to probably continue to be so.
There are roughly 2.4 million farm jobs that need to be filled annually, but the number of available workers is on the decline. Now, with the help of artificial intelligence, farmers are getting the help they need to perform labor-intensive tasks despite that labor shortage.
Growing the plants has become the easiest part. All those crops take a lot of hand labor. And our biggest challenge is people and making that part of it work. We need more people.
Meet the Farm NG production crew.
Ethan Rubley and Claire Delaney launched Farm NG just outside Silicon Valley to reimagine farm tools with the help of AI. They built the Amiga, a robot that can handle farming tasks, including seeding, weeding, and harvesting.
Back in the day, we would do that. We'd bring a wagon in here with a load of compost and with shovels and buckets. It got to the point where we couldn't afford to do that anymore, too labor intensive. With the compost spreader and the Amiga tool, all of a sudden one guy can do the compost spreading by himself. The way young people are going to be farming in the future is going to be a few young, smart individuals really excited about growing food, excited about soils, and having all these cool tools to play with.
This is part of a long tradition that is the reason why we have the world we have. Because you don't have to go that far back for the United States to be 40% agriculture in terms of our labor force. And you go a little further back, and we are all trying to keep ourselves alive on our family farms and having a lot of kids, partly because we need the labor. Innovation, technological improvement, is the far more powerful disruptor of particular jobs at particular times. This is a constant tension we face. This is a classic sort of free market libertarian story. Oh, look, why worry? We used to all be farmers, and now only 2% of the country farms, less than 2%. Isn't that great? Isn't that perfect? Isn't it wonderful? And the answer is yes, but work brings human dignity, and we are on the verge of things that start to get a little scary.
I wake, I clean, I live. They leave gifts for me, so kind. They feed me like a king. But I don't do it for accolades. My work is my sustenance, soaking up every last crumb in every last crevice. Potato chips.
So say goodbye to working at the car wash on your summer break. The Tesla robots are going to do it for you and for our kids. And that will raise the question of where the heck is anybody going to learn what it means to work an honest day in the future? I think this is something I worry about quite a bit. Where are we headed? Trade is one thing that disrupts our lives, but the future of technological change threatens to be an even bigger disruptor. And I'm not really sure where that leaves us in the future. We will be materially better off, but the entire order of our society might change in ways that are hard for us to understand. I think in a lot of ways, the issues around trade mirror that of a lot of the rest of what it means to live in a free society and want to have freedom, and why individual freedom in general is going to be a better deal than political control and central planning. Because for all of the caveats about where free trade disrupts our lives or creates fragility that might be a problem, I personally have yet to see an example where the government did a particularly good job in rationally or ethically adjusting for those challenges. We spend a lot of money on government training programs that are highly ineffective. As you saw going back to Ronald Reagan and throughout all of political history, the attempts to protect certain industries are often shrouded in nationalist language, but tend just to be kind of corporate cronyism and special interest lobbying more than anything that you could call the common good. While I supported President Trump and I want him to succeed, I don't think he in any way is immune to these corrupt forces of politics. And, you know, he's always been a tiny bit corrupt himself. Let's be honest here. We can like him and recognize that he's a little prone towards playing favorites. So I would much rather, I think, live in a world where we benefit from trade, both the pressure it puts on us to do better and be competitive, and the benefits that are just outright in terms of our division of labor, bringing down the cost of all the goods and services that we need, and try to learn for ourselves as individuals, as families, as businesses, as industries, where to build up more resilience. I hope the private sector learned from COVID that we need more buffer, we need more capacity in this country, and we can afford to do it. We are big, we are wealthy, we should do that. We shouldn't leave ourselves open to that kind of disruption and be as reliant on our geopolitical enemy, China, as we are. Now, do I want China to be our enemy? No, I don't. I'd much rather us have peaceful trade and be friends. But I don't get to make the rules on the global order. We as parents should do our best to try to educate ourselves on these issues and help guide our kids to a better economic understanding, because I think the more you understand this central pillar of economics, I mean, this is the central argument of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, the benefits of free trade, not just between nations, but between states, between cities, between businesses. The logic of free trade applies at all levels. I think the better off we understand that, the better our kids understand it, the better we'll be at navigating the world. And that's what I think we should want for ourselves and for our kids. But let me know what you think in the comments. As always, I'm always excited to see you down there. And if you love what we do here at Dad Saves America, be sure to head over to dadssavesamerica.com and subscribe to our Substack so you won't miss our new videos and won't be subject to the YouTube algorithm alone. And if you really love what we do, we are a nonprofit organization, and so you can make a small donation to keep this show going. I like to say we're like the private PBS that truly loves America. So I appreciate the support and look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great weekend.